What's up, guys? Neil Orfield here, and I'm going to show you how I will be setting up my fantasy cruncher for tonight's Monday Night Football game between the Patriots and the Cardinals. I'll be setting up for the largest field GPP on FanDuel. While you're coming in, please hit the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the alert button if you want to get alerts when our shows go live. We've got a lot of great content on this channel. All right, first thing I'm going to do is rearrange my columns a little bit. I've got a quick view saved so that I can see right in the middle of the screen, ownership projections on each player, projection that I'm using, and then exposure cap. From here, I'm going to sort by projection, and I'm going to remove some players from my player pool. Anybody who has a projection of 0, I'm just going to take them out of my player pool right now. So I'm just going to click here and scroll down, get rid of all these players. This is just for the purpose of when I'm making groups. If you remove these players, they're not going to be included in those in the groups tab, and it's just saves a little bit of time to remove all these players. Makes it easier to find the players that you want to find. And on FanDuel in particular, they have a lot of players in the player pool. There we go. Okay. Next, I'm going to go to the MVP tab, and I'm going to set a universal exposure cap. On this slate, I think I'm still going to just use 20%, at least for now. Seems about right. I think that there are enough viable MVP options here that 20% seems good. All right, I'm going to go into advanced options. And starting, I'm going to be using the general tab and the groups tab, two places I'm going to be making changes here. Starting here in the general tab, unique players per lineup, the default is set to 1. For this video, I'm going to be setting up for a 150 set of lineups. In a 150 set of lineups, I like to keep this at 1 unique player, so my lineups can be 1 player apart from each other. If you're making 40 or fewer lineups, I'd say I would use a change this to maybe 2 unique players per lineup, just for the sake of diversifying your lineup set. Salary, I'm not going to set a minimum. I am going to set a maximum salary just for the purpose of avoiding the most duplicated lineups. If I'm lucky enough to win, I don't want to be duplicated 2,000 times. When I get my win, I want it to be, as few dupes as possible, and so that I can win as much money as possible. So I'm going to set a salary cap here, and I'm going to set it at $58,500. I'd recommend leaving at least $1,000 on the table. The more you leave on the table, the less likely generally you are to win, just incrementally. But then the more likely you are to be unique. So leaving $1,500 on the table here, I think that I'm going to avoid the most duplicated lineups. And if I lose a little bit in projection, it's not enough that I'm all that concerned about it. All right, offensive players versus defense. The default is set to max of 2 players. I'm going to change that to a max of 4 players. So I can theoretically have a lineup that has 4 players from one team against the defense of the opposing team. I think that kind of lineup build tends to go a little bit underutilized in these contests. It's still not something I'm going to have a ton of, I would guess, in my lineup set, but I like to at least allow for it. Global exposure cap, I'm going to leave that at 100%. So I could have 100% of players in the flex. And then randomness, I'm going to set at 30%. Generally, the lower you set this number, the more control you're going to have over your lineups. So if you want even more control over your lineups, I would set this number lower. If you want to include a little bit more randomness in your process, obviously increase this randomness number. Minimum projection included in calculation, the default is set to 3. I'm going to leave that at 3. If there are players who I want in my player pool who project for fewer than 3 fantasy points, I'm just going to boost their projection to above that 3 fantasy point threshold. And then players from each team max, I'm going to leave this at 4, so I can have 4 players from one team against 1 from the opposing team. Guys, we have a great offer for new users only. You can get full access to everything Stokastic has to offer for NFL for 3 days free. Projections, ownership, 1v1 tools, lineup generator, top stacks tool. 0 risk because it's all free. So sign up now. The link is in the description of this video. Note that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on and is not included in this offer. All right, next I'm going to go into the groups tab. Those are the only 2 tabs I use here. And I'm going to create groups revolving around the quarterbacks. First group I'm going to make is a Mac Jones MVP group. So I'm going to find Mac Jones in the MVP spot, make him my key player. Then I'm going to sort by position, and I'm going to add all of the Patriots pass catchers into the secondary group. And you can do this pretty quickly just by looking team logo, looking here at everybody with that Patriots logo among pass catchers. And I am including running backs here. Ramondre Stevenson is pretty involved in the passing game for the Patriots. Okay, so that is the entirety of this group. Now with Mac Jones, he has very limited rushing upside. So in the MVP spot, if he puts up enough fantasy points to be in the MVP spot, that's going to be, a good number of fantasy points. Probably means that he's throwing for multiple touchdowns, just because, Mac Jones, again, unlikely to get there if he doesn't throw for multiple touchdowns because he doesn't have any kind of rushing upside. And that's generally the way quarterbacks score their most fantasy points, is by throwing touchdowns. I think generally, due to the lack of rushing upside, I would like to have at least 2 pass catchers from the Patriots in lineups with Mac Jones in the MVP spot. The concern, if you only have one, is if Mac Jones is throwing multiple touchdowns to one receiver, then there's a pretty good chance that receiver is going to end up outscoring him, and then they'll be the optimal MVP instead of Mac Jones, particularly on FanDuel where there is no salary multiplier in the MVP spot. So typically, I'd like to have at least 2 Patriots pass catchers in any lineup that has Mac Jones in the MVP. So I can set that down here. If you have Mac Jones in the MVP spot, so that's my key player, then use at least 2 players from this group. I mean, you don't necessarily need, in a 150 set, I would think about keeping this at 1. I'd think about, do I want to change this to 2 or just leave it at 1 and then give boost to these players to make it more likely that I get 2? There's definitely an argument to do that, to leave this at 1 and give boosts. Probably the best argument is the last game the Patriots played, or I don't remember, it was the last game or the one before. Mac Jones actually threw multiple times to a backup defensive back who, for some reason, they were using in the offense, actually scored a touchdown. Weird things happen in the NFL. So certainly plausible that Mac Jones could throw a touchdown to a player who is not in the player pool, in which case maybe you don't need multiple of these receivers who are in the player pool to be in the lineup. But generally, I think it's a better practice. It's more likely to occur that Mac Jones, if he is the optimal MVP, will bring along multiple pass catchers from the Patriots. I'm debating a little bit. I think actually I'm going to change this. I'm going to leave it at 1 and just give boost. That way I also get a little bit more control over who I want to give boost to and to the extent that I want to give them boosts. So here I'm going to give boost to all of these receivers and tight ends. I think I'm not actually going to give a boost to Ramondre Stevenson just because he projects so well. Let me just look at, DeAndre Hopkins is more expensive, projects for fewer fantasy points. Yeah, I'm actually not going to give any kind of boost to Ramondre Stevenson because I think that he's likely to get into a number of these lineups anyway, even without a boost. And I don't think I want him to be in 100% of the lineups that I have Mac Jones in the MVP spot. So I think I'm just going to do this. I'm going to leave this. And this is, again, there's no magic to these numbers. These are numbers that I've found, kind of through trial and error over the years. This is about how much I like to give boost to these guys so that they don't, it doesn't lock them into the lineups where I have Mac Jones in the MVP, but it is enough to make it more likely that I get them in those lineups. All right. So I'm going to leave this group here. Again, I'm leaving this at just 1 player required, but then more likely to get multiple because of the boosts. All right, next group I'm going to make is a Kyler MVP lineup. So I'm going to find Kyler in the MVP spot, make him my key player. And again, now I'm going to add all of these Cardinals pass catchers to the secondary group. And again, I'm going to include the running backs. James Conner has been involved in the passing game for the Cardinals. All right, that'll do it for this group. Kyler's kind of the opposite kind of quarterback of Mac Jones. Maybe not quite the opposite. He's not on like the Lamar Jackson level, but Kyler rushes for over 40 yards per game. He does have a 100-yard rushing game this season already. So, he has the upside to potentially be the optimal MVP without bringing along any pass catchers from the Cardinals. If he does have one of those spike weeks rushing where, say, he rushes for 100 yards and a touchdown, that's 16 fantasy points right there. It might be enough that, he's still probably going to have to add a little bit through the air, but not necessarily a ton. So, say he gets those 16 points on the ground and then throws a touchdown to DeAndre Hopkins. Well, DeAndre Hopkins' price is high enough that one touchdown isn't going to be enough to get him into the optimal lineup. So I think it is plausible for Kyler Murray to be the optimal MVP without bringing along any pass catchers from the Cardinals. So I'm going to hit this only apply plus minus adjustments button. But then once again, I do think it's more likely that Kyler, if he's the optimal MVP, he's probably throwing at least one touchdown, maybe multiple, and bringing along at least one Cardinals pass catcher with him. So I am, again, going to give boost to all of these players as well. And you saw it. DeAndre Hopkins projects for like 7 fewer fantasy points than Ramondre Stevenson, and he's more expensive. I think it's actually pretty unlikely that I'm going to get to many lineups that have DeAndre Hopkins in flex with Kyler Murray at MVP, just because it'll naturally give me Ramondre Stevenson instead. So maybe I actually need to be giving bigger boosts here than I usually do just to account for that fact. But I'm going to leave it at this for now, see how the lineups come out. All right, and then finally, I'm going to make a group with Mac Jones in the flex spot. And it's the same idea. I'm going to find Mac Jones now in the flex spot, make him my key player, and then add all of these Patriots pass catchers to the secondary group. And now because I have him in the flex spot, I can add these Patriots in the MVP spot as well. And then I'm not even going to bother making a group for Kyler in the flex spot because I think, we're going to get some lineups with pass catchers naturally. And then also if Kyler's in the flex spot, he doesn't necessarily need to put up as many fantasy points, and he can certainly do more of the damage on the ground. So it doesn't necessarily need to correlate that much with his pass catchers. And that's all I'm going to do for these groups. Guys, we have a great offer for new users only. You can get full access to everything Stokastic has to offer for NFL for 3 days free. Projections, ownership, 1v1 tools, lineup generator, top stacks tool. Zero risk because it's all free. So sign up now. The link is in the description of this video. Note that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on and is not included in this offer. Then I'll come down here and I'll crunch 150 lineups using my projections, which are currently the Stokastic projections. And you can see I'm getting a lot of naked Kyler in these lineups, probably more than I actually would like. So maybe I will have to adjust a little bit. But before, so the two things I'm looking at after I crunch out lineups, I look at the lineups themselves. Do they correlate well enough? And then I look at player exposures. Am I getting, as much as I want of various players? And I can see right away. I mean, this lineup is fine to have, if I have a few of these with Kyler in the MVP without any Cardinals pass catchers in the flex, I'm okay with it in some lineups, but I also I don't want that to be like the majority of my Kyler MVP lineup. So if we take a look at those, 1, 2, all of these ones are starting off with Kyler without any pass catcher. Here's the first one with a pass catcher with Greg Dortch. So I don't actually love that. It's a mix now. As I scroll down, there are more and more with multiple pass catchers. But first, before I actually change anything with the correlations, I want to look at my actual exposures of these players, because it might be that I'm just not getting into those pass catchers, and I could change it a little bit that way. All right, getting to 60% of each of these quarterbacks. I can see right away I'm getting to 97% Ramondre Stevenson in my lineups, assuming I have 20%. Yeah, 97% Ramondre Stevenson in my lineups. I don't know that I necessarily want that much. So I'm actually going to right away, I would probably lower his projection. Again, I'm not actually going to make these decisions right now. I'm showing you my general process, but I'm not actually, this is not going to be my final crunch. Just showing you in general what I do is I go through now by position. How much am I getting of various players? Do I want more? Do I want less? Maybe I want more than 17% James Conner, give him a little boost. And I just do these boosts incrementally. Okay, I'm getting 7% Kevin Harris. I should sort by salary here. 7% Kevin Harris. He's 5,000. He's the min price, and he's the presumptive RB2 for the Patriots. Yeah, it's kind of interesting at 5,000 at 3% ownership. I think I might want a little bit more Kevin Harris. So maybe I'll bump him up a little bit in his projection. But then Keontae Ingram also is the RB2 for the Cardinals, and he is coming in at 3% ownership. Currently, he has a projection below 3 fantasy points, so he's not even in my player pool. Maybe I'd like to get him in the player pool. A little bit of a boost as well. All right, wide receivers. Okay, you can see here, I'm not getting to any 2% DeAndre Hopkins. So this is part of the problem with those correlations is I'm just not getting to the receivers as much. I think that I'd like to get more than 2% DeAndre Hopkins. So I'm just going to right away give him a pretty big boost. Same thing with Marquise Brown. And then these other receivers, maybe I'll give them a little boost as well. I'm going to do maybe one more crunch after this. Making bigger changes than I normally make. Usually I'm pretty incremental with these changes, but just because I want to do it a little bit quicker, I'm not going to. I'm going to make them a little bit bigger than I usually do. And then Hunter Henry, okay, only getting 10%. Maybe I'll give him a little bit more of a boost. Jonnu Smith, pretty interesting. Give him a boost. Trey McBride, he's been out there. He's been running routes. Hasn't done a whole lot with them, but he is the tight end one now for the Cardinals. Maybe I want Steven Anderson, Max Williams in my player pool. And then kickers. All right, maybe I want a little bit more of these guys. Or at least I want to give them boost to retain, the amount that I'm getting currently. And defense is getting very little. Not a huge shock there. Maybe I give them a little bit of a boost, and then I'll crunch again. And you can see I'm still, my second lineup here, I have Kyler Murray with at least one pass catcher, so I like to see that. But I'm still getting a fair amount of Kyler naked, maybe more than I would like. In general, I prefer to have him with pass catchers in the majority of my lineups. But still, what am I getting with? I'm up to 16% DeAndre Hopkins. I'm still just not getting much of these pass catchers. All right, I'm going to do one more crunch. Just to show you how these adjustments have gone. Okay, so now I'm getting right around 50% of each of the quarterbacks. That looks good. Again, still getting to 87% Ramondre. It has come down, but maybe I want a little bit more DeAndre Hopkins at the expense of these Ramondre shares, just a little bit. Maybe I drop that a little bit. Try to get a little bit more James Conner. Maybe I need some more of these running backs. And then maybe I need to get a bit more DeAndre Hopkins. Still want him to project lower than Ramondre Stevenson. I think just in a vacuum, I'd rather get Ramondre Stevenson and his better projection, but I want to get DeAndre Hopkins in more of those lineups that correlate well. Those Kyler MVP lineups. Getting him a little bit closer here. So now that 12% boost gets him in that range. If Ramondre Stevenson gets him more likely to be in those lineups. These guys project. These guys have the same salary. Just give them the same projection. And now I'm more likely to get to Tyquan Thornton in lineups that have Mac Jones, more likely to get to AJ Green in lineups with Kyler at MVP if I give them the same projection. And then tight end. Let's try this. Crunch one more time. All right, so you can see here right away, Mac Jones at MVP, multiple pass catching options. That's what I like to see. Here we got Mac Jones with multiple again. Now I'm getting to less Kyler, it looks like. Interesting. I'm still getting somewhere around 50% total of Kyler. But in general, these lineups now they're correlated by Kyler and MVP with DeAndre Hopkins. Here's naked Kyler. Don't love that. Here's naked Kyler in the MVP. Love that even less. So maybe now I need to go back and I'm not going to spend too much time doing this, but I'd go back to advanced options, groups, maybe find that Kyler MVP group and give bigger boosts. So rather than 12%, maybe I want to give 16% boost to Kyler's pass catchers when he's in the MVP spot. Make it even more likely I get to these guys. And then maybe I could go back and make a similar group to Kyler in the flex group, and again use this, but this only apply plus minus adjustments, but then give boost to those pass catchers again to make it less likely that I end up with so many Kyler naked lineups. Then after doing that, crunch again. But I'm not going to keep doing this and do all of my crunches here on this video. Just want to give you a general idea of my process. And this is it. I crunch out, look at my lineups. Do they correlate the way I want them to? And then I go through position by position, look at exposures. Am I getting to the exposures that I want to get of each player? And that's kind of the entirety of the process. I do this several times, sometimes 20, 30 times before I get to exposure levels that I like and lineups that correlate the way I want them to. But that's all I do, just over and over until I get to the lineup sets that I like. Again, I'm not going to go through the entire process now of all those crunches. That would take us another hour. Just want to give you a general idea of what the process looks like. Hope you can find some success tonight using this or a similar process. Good luck.